early October 2025, hundreds of thousands of Hungarians flooded Budapest's Heroes Square, waving EU and national flags, a sight unseen since the fall of the Iron Curtain. Within hours, global media labeled it the largest anti-government protest in modern Hungarian history. Why now? And why with such fury could one pipeline really ignite a political revolution? The spark came from a recent European court ruling declaring that sabotaging a Russian energy artery can constitute legitimate self-defense when it finances war crimes. The verdict effectively turned the Druzhba pipeline, Russia's last major oil link to Europe, into a lawful target. For President Vladimir Putin, this meant the potential collapse of a crucial lifeline worth billions. For Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, it meant political ruin. Orbán had built his brand on peace through neutrality, arguing Hungary's dependence on Russian crude was geographic fate. Yet as Reuters reported on October 12, 2025, European refiners from Croatia to Austria already offered replacement supply routes that would cost Budapest far less than Moscow's discounted barrels once sanctions tighten. In domino effect terms, a single legal ruling in Poland shook the energy balance of an entire continent. If one artery can be deemed lawful to hit, every similar link becomes fair game. Crowds chanting "Russians go home" weren't just condemning war, they were condemning the price of silence. As DW's correspondents noted, Orbán's prolonged resistance to EU unity has left Hungary with inflation above 14% and investor confidence at its lowest since 2011. Each forint spent on Russian oil protesters shouted is a forint stolen from teachers and hospitals. That sentiment captures the opportunity cost perspective. Every dollar Budapest sends to Moscow is a dollar it cannot invest in its own recovery. Analysts in Brussels see a deeper strategic contrast emerging. While Orbán claims to protect national sovereignty, his energy dependence anchors Hungary inside Putin's sphere. By contrast, neighboring Slovakia, once equally reliant on Russian fuel, shifted 60% of its imports to Western contracts within a year, according to Eurostat. Budapest's neutrality, therefore, increasingly looks like isolation. President Donald Trump's administration, keen to pressure European laggards to follow NATO's sanctions line, added its own layer of stress. A senior White House official told BBC News that any EU member continuing substantial energy purchases from sanctioned Russian firms could face secondary trade restrictions by 2026. The message reached Hungarian markets instantly. Bond yields spiked, and the forint slid to a 5-year low. Meanwhile, opposition leader Péter Magyar seized the moment, calling the protest a second 1956. He compared Orbán's loyalty to Moscow with the communist regime that once crushed Hungarian freedom. As night fell, drone footage showed an ocean of cell phone lights stretching along Andrassy Avenue, a symbolic rebuke to the Kremlin's darkness. Yet the question remains: if public anger can shake Budapest, can it also ripple through Moscow's financial armor? What happens when the dominoes reach Putin's balance sheet? The next part explores why Hungary's revolt echoes a much older struggle and how memory itself became a weapon. In late October 2025, the timing of Hungary's protests stunned observers. The rallies peaked on October 23rd, the anniversary of the 1956 uprising against Soviet rule. The symbolism was unmistakable. The same squares where students once faced down Soviet tanks were now filled with citizens defying what they see as Russia's shadow reborn through Viktor Orbán's policies. Can history really repeat itself in the heart of Europe? 69 years earlier, Budapest's Revolution Day had been marked by the cry for freedom from Moscow's grip. That cry has returned this time, targeting the pipelines and trade deals that tether Hungary's economy to the Kremlin. "We are the grandchildren of 1956," one protester told BBC Europe. Our grandparents fought Soviet guns, we fight Russian gas. This historical resonance adds weight to what Reuters analysts call a domino effect of memory. The revival of 1956's narrative is not only political, it's cultural infrastructure shaking loose. Museums, universities, and even church leaders have publicly sided with protesters, a collective act of defiance that erodes Orbán's domestic legitimacy brick by brick. When collective memory becomes a social movement, each chant of Russians go home topples a new domino within Hungary's state apparatus. Meanwhile, Orbán tried to reframe the uprising as a peace rally, accusing pro-war nations in Brussels of dragging Europe toward conflict. But his rhetoric now clashes with daily realities. The Financial Times reported that Hungary's inflation rate and shrinking foreign reserves forced the government to delay infrastructure projects, demonstrating the opportunity cost of political obstinacy. The more Budapest shields Russian interests, the fewer euros it can direct toward its own modernization. Western experts underline another contradiction: the strategic contrast between Orbán's declared neutrality and his deep energy entanglement with Moscow. Defense News noted that Hungary continues to host Russian nuclear engineers, expanding the PAX-2 power plant, even as NATO fortifies its eastern flank against Russian aggression. It's a paradoxical stance, said retired U.S. General Ben Hodges. Hungary sits inside NATO, but fuels the very machine that NATO is deterring. President Trump's administration, aware of the symbolic power of the Hungarian streets, responded cautiously but firmly. In a statement carried by Al Jazeera, the State Department praised the Hungarian people's right to self-determination, while reminding allies that energy dependency is a strategic vulnerability, not a strength. Washington's phrasing hinted at an unspoken threat alignment with Moscow could soon carry real economic penalties. For the protesters, those words reinforced momentum. Péter Magyar, now dubbed the reformer in a lawyer's suit, addressed a sea of flags promising to complete what 1956 began. His speeches, echoing through the capital, fused historical trauma with modern economics. Every barrel of Russian oil keeps a Russian missile in the sky. As dawn broke over the Danube, Hungarian news outlets described the scene as a nation reborn. Yet beneath the euphoria lay a dangerous uncertainty. Could Orbán's government survive if energy supplies falter? And if the Hungarian domino falls, which capital might tremble next? Bratislava, Warsaw, or even Moscow itself? The next section follows the man challenging Orbán's throne and how his rapid ascent transformed Hungary's political battlefield. By early November 2025, the name Péter Magyar had become synonymous with rebellion. A former insider within Viktor Orbán's own party, Magyar had once been a loyal technocrat. Now he stood on makeshift stages across Budapest, flanked by tens of thousands, declaring that Hungary belongs to the people, not to Moscow. How did one man rise from bureaucrat to national symbol in less than a year? His transformation was born of disillusion. As corruption scandals multiplied, ranging from overpriced energy contracts to opaque Russian loans for nuclear expansion, Magyar publicly resigned, accusing Orbán's administration of trading Hungary's sovereignty for short-term oil discounts. According to DW News, this defection shocked the ruling Fidesz party more than any opposition speech could. It was the moment the government's internal domino fell. Magyar's strategy was clear: turn Orbán's narrative of peace through neutrality into a moral liability. He invoked the opportunity cost argument repeatedly. Every euro transferred to Gazprom, he said, was an investment in Russian missiles raining over Odessa. You cannot call it neutrality when your money funds the aggressor, he told Reuters on November 5th. His message resonated with young professionals and the middle class, who bore the brunt of 14% inflation and stagnating wages. Western media began portraying Magyar as a hybrid between reformist and pragmatist, a leader channeling 1956 spirit through 2025 economics. Analysts at The Guardian noted that his proposed Energy Independence Act could align Hungary with EU green initiatives while phasing out Russian crude within 3 years. The plan impressed Brussels and rattled Moscow simultaneously. Meanwhile, Orbán's circle responded with intimidation. State television dismissed Magyar as a foreign agent echoing Kremlin playbooks, yet such tactics only amplified his credibility. Each attack by pro-government outlets added another strategic contrast. Orbán appeared trapped defending his legacy while Magyar projected renewal. In Washington, the Trump administration watched closely. According to Defense News, U.S. diplomats quietly reached out to Magyar's team, exploring ways to pivot Hungary back toward full NATO cooperation. "We don't pick sides in internal politics," one senior official told BBC World Service, "but we always support those who strengthen Western unity." The subtext was unmistakable. If Hungary shifted course, financial and energy aid could follow. By mid-month, the protests evolved into an organized political movement called for a free Hungary. Its rallies spanned 10 cities, drawing support from trade unions and teachers' associations, once silenced by Orbán's media apparatus. The domino effect had gone national. What began as outrage over oil dependency now threatened to dismantle the entire political infrastructure built over 15 years. Still, the path forward remained treacherous. Orbán retained control of state institutions, and Moscow had too much at stake to lose its last European ally easily. Russian state media warned that Western interference could destabilize Central Europe, framing Magyar's rise as an American plot. Yet the more the Kremlin protested, the more Hungarians sensed they were onto something historic. As winter approached, Hungarian politics felt like a ticking pressure valve, one that could rupture not just a government, but a geopolitical alignment. Could Magyar's movement outlast the machinery of power, or would it be crushed before spring elections? The next section examines how energy pipelines, literal and political, became the battlefield where Hungary's fate and Russia's finances now collide. By mid-November 2025, Hungary's crisis had become an energy war disguised as politics. At the center stood the Druzhba pipeline, an aging Soviet-era artery that still pumped nearly 200,000 barrels of Russian oil daily through Ukraine into Hungary and Slovakia. It was more than steel and valves. It was the last thread binding Moscow's economy to the heart of Europe. When Polish and German courts began treating energy sabotage as a legitimate act of self-defense, investors instantly recognized what that meant. Druzhba could be next. Was Europe's quietest front about to become its most explosive? Orbán's administration tried to calm markets, insisting the flow would remain uninterrupted. Yet according to Reuters' energy desk, Western insurers and logistics firms had already withdrawn coverage from several Russian cargoes linked to the line. The resulting price spikes hit Hungarian refineries within days. Economists in Budapest called it the sanction inside the sanction, a perfect domino effect, where a single legal precedent in Warsaw cascaded through financial systems, insurance pools, and fuel terminals hundreds of kilometers away. Meanwhile, Washington moved to tighten the noose. President Trump's Treasury Department announced that any entity purchasing more than 25% of its crude from sanctioned Russian suppliers would face secondary restrictions starting February 2026. That ruling placed Hungary squarely in the crosshairs. As BBC Business reported, even Orbán's closest trade allies in Austria began exploring alternative supply chains through the Croatian port of Rijeka, effectively isolating Budapest from its own neighbors. The opportunity cost was immense. Instead of channeling funds into transport, digital infrastructure, or education, Orbán's government allocated nearly $2 billion to emergency fuel subsidies to prevent shortages. Its economic triage, observed The Guardian's Brussels correspondent. They're paying citizens to forget who caused the wound. Strategically, the contrast grew sharper. Slovakia's pro-EU coalition had already reduced Russian imports by 60%, while Poland announced plans to phase out the last remnants of Russian oil by spring 2026. Defense news analysts highlighted the irony. Hungary, a NATO member, was bankrolling Russia's war industry more directly than several neutral states. That contradiction, said retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Peter Monroe, undermines NATO's deterrence credibility from within. Orbán's counter-argument that geography left him no choice rang hollow once the European Commission confirmed that the Adria pipeline from Croatia could meet Hungary's full demand. EU officials publicly guaranteed price stability for transition supplies, leaving Orbán exposed as clinging to Moscow for political, not logistical reasons. The Trump administration's envoy to NATO added diplomatic weight, telling DW that allies must wean themselves off Kremlin pipelines or risk becoming leverage points in Putin's strategy. Behind the scenes, NATO energy security planners began simulating contingency routes to protect Europe from a potential Russian countermove, shutting Drozhba entirely to punish dissenters. Within Hungary, ordinary citizens already felt the fallout. Fuel shortages rippled through provincial towns, sparking queues reminiscent of the socialist era. The revolution of 1956 began with students and gasoline, read a viral social media post. History seems to rhyme, and that rhyme may soon turn to rupture. If Orbán loses both the street and the supply line, Hungary's role as Russia's Trojan horse inside the EU could end overnight. Yet in Moscow, Putin's advisors whispered a darker response if energy pipelines become fair targets. What about retaliatory cyber strikes on European grids? The next section explores how a single Polish court verdict has set off a chain reaction stretching from Budapest to the Kremlin's war room. By late November 2025, the reverberations of that Polish court verdict were still shaking Europe's capitals. In Warsaw, judges had ruled that sabotaging Russian pipelines, if done to stop an aggressor's war financing, was a lawful act of self-defense. It was a moral earthquake. What began as a legal nuance soon became a strategic doctrine. If Nord Stream could be justified as a wartime target, why not the Drozhba line that still bankrolls Moscow's missiles? Was Europe's energy map about to be redrawn by law instead of bombs? Moscow reacted furiously. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov called the verdict state-sanctioned terrorism, while Russian media thundered about NATO's war through lawyers. But beneath the bluster, insiders knew the danger. As Reuters reported, nearly 27% of Russia's remaining hard currency inflows now depend on crude exports moving through Drozhba. Losing that artery would blow a hole in Putin's wartime budget. The domino effect was immediate. Hungarian officials panicked that the same legal reasoning could legitimize strikes on the very pipeline sustaining their economy. Within 48 hours, Foreign Minister Péter posted an angry thread accusing Poland of giving terrorists a license to blow up Europe. His outrage, amplified across state television, only underscored how fragile Hungary's position had become. Western analysts viewed the episode differently. Wars today are not fought only with tanks, explained Dr. Elena Markovic, an energy security expert at NATO's Defense College. They're fought with insurance contracts, legal frameworks, and courtrooms. The Polish decision effectively turned law into a weapon. The opportunity cost for Russia was equally profound. To protect its assets, Moscow diverted engineering crews and military drones from the Ukrainian front to guard critical infrastructure across Belarus and Western Russia. That's manpower not defending the battlefield, noted Defense News. Each ruble spent fortifying pipelines is a ruble not funding the army, a zero-sum game Russia cannot afford indefinitely. President Trump's administration seized the moment to rally NATO unity. In a joint briefing, the U.S. State Department and Pentagon praised the Polish ruling as a reaffirmation of sovereign self-defense. The BBC quoted one senior official saying, "Energy coercion is aggression by another name." Washington's message was clear: allies standing up to Russian leverage would have America's full support. This stance emboldened Warsaw and Vilnius to expand cooperation on energy resilience projects. Poland accelerated its Baltic pipe expansion toward Slovakia, and Lithuania proposed a NATO-wide energy defense fund to safeguard member infrastructure from cyber or kinetic attacks. For Orbán, these moves signaled isolation. Hungary's neighbors were fortifying themselves against the very dependency his government clung to. Inside, Budapest state media tried to spin the story as a Western conspiracy, but public trust kept sliding. Surveys by DW indicated 64% of Hungarians now favored reducing Russian oil imports, even if it meant short-term pain. The historical parallel was striking. Just as 1956's rebels defied Moscow's tanks, 2025's citizens were defying its pipelines. Strategically, the contrast sharpened once more. Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic states framed energy independence as moral resistance. Hungary framed it as impossible geography. Yet, as analysts at Al Jazeera observed, when morality aligns with markets, politics must follow. Still, questions linger. If Europe's courts can redefine warfare's boundaries, could Moscow retaliate with its own hybrid tools? Cyber attacks, disinformation, or covert sabotage on Western soil? The final section examines whether Putin's shrinking influence in Central Europe marks the beginning of his strategic collapse or the birth of a far more unpredictable confrontation. By December 2025, what began as a protest in Budapest had evolved into a continental reckoning. Across Europe, from Warsaw to Vienna, governments were reassessing their ties to Russian energy, while Moscow's once unchallenged influence began to fracture. The domino effect had moved beyond politics. It was rewriting Europe's strategic map. Was this, analysts wondered, the beginning of the end for Putin's shadow empire? Hungary stood at the eye of this storm. Orbán's political machine, long considered impregnable, began showing cracks. The Financial Times reported that senior Fidesz officials were quietly meeting EU mediators to discuss transition scenarios should mass protests persist. Péter Magyar's opposition movement for a free Hungary was now polling within 5 points of Orbán's party, a gap unimaginable just months earlier. The street has shifted the center of gravity, noted DW's Budapest bureau chief. Meanwhile, NATO planners met in Brussels to assess the broader ripple effects. President Trump's administration had made clear that member states must align energy behavior with collective defense. The message landed especially hard in Hungary, which faced potential suspension from certain NATO energy security programs if it continued to fund Russian oil flows. According to Defense News, the alliance's Energy Security Division was drafting a contingency to reroute crude and gas through Croatia and Romania to isolate Moscow's leverage permanently. This transformation illustrates the opportunity cost that Russia faces as its economic web unravels. To defend Drozhba and its dwindling revenue streams, Moscow reportedly reassigned more than 15,000 security personnel from frontline logistics to infrastructure protection. That diversion, described by The Guardian as a symptom of overstretch, has already slowed Russia's ammunition resupply to the Donbass front by 20%, according to NATO intelligence leaks cited by Reuters. Strategically, the contrast could not be starker. While Putin's regime clings to decaying pipelines, Europe is fast-tracking a diversified energy future. EU data published in December showed a 48% reduction in Russian fossil imports compared to 2022, a geopolitical transformation once thought impossible. This is deterrence through independence, said retired U.S. Admiral James Stavridis. Every barrel not bought from Russia is one less bullet funded in Ukraine. But Orbán's calculus remains risky. Facing elections in early 2026, he bet on fatigue that Hungarians would choose economic stability over moral alignment. Yet, as Al Jazeera noted, a generation raised on European values may no longer accept being Moscow's exception. Péter Magyar's rallies, filled with both Hungarian and EU flags, symbolize a deeper identity struggle whether Hungary belongs to the West it helped rebuild or to the empire it once escaped. In the Kremlin, the silence grew ominous. Energy revenues plunged 30% from the previous quarter, according to Bloomberg Economics, forcing emergency budget cuts. Analysts warned that Russia's sanction-busting routes through Belarus and the Balkans could collapse next if Hungary shifts sides. If Budapest goes, said Polish analyst Radosław Sikorski, the last domino falls. And yet, uncertainty remains. Will Europe's new legal precedent inspire a full economic rupture or provoke Moscow into new asymmetric retaliation? The answer could determine not only Hungary's political fate, but the next phase of the war itself.